colleagues of mine here at Prosper, and we do team care medicine together. And we are going to be talking about stress today. And this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, especially lately with the pandemic and all that there is to juggle with family and the feeling of not getting to do the normal stress reducing activities because there's so many limitations, and everything else that comes along with that. So we're going to be talking about some great strategies today, and at the end we're going to be talking about something that you guys can do if you want to kind of take this to the next level as far as stress reduction. So one of the most important pieces for us when we're doing these doc talks is for you guys to walk away with information that's usable. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do is we're going to start with just a little survey here while we're waiting for a few more people to jump in. And so I believe Dr. Rosalie is going to send that out to you guys. Dr. Rosalie, you want to introduce the survey?
Sure thing. So I'll put it in the chat as well, but our poll for today is, what stress management tool has been most helpful and or useful to you? And there's 5 options: meditation, mindfulness, breath work, exercise or movement practice, counseling, and sleep. So I'll put that in the chat, and I'd love to hear you guys respond back in the chat what your most useful tool has been.
And we'll be talking about those more towards the end. It's kind of a fun way that we can interact. And if you guys have questions today that come up, we really want to make sure we get to those. So we'll be taking those at the very end. So please make sure that you go ahead and enter those into the chat box, and we'll make sure that we address those, because I know how hard it is when you're listening to someone talk and you're like, oh, I've got a question. But we have so much good information today. We want to make sure that we get through all the information and can at the same time answer those questions. So we'll touch back on those at the end, but we want you to be able to jot them down so you don't forget. So today, as we are going through this topic, we really want to talk about stress and what it is and how we recognize it and how it can affect our health. And we're also going to be wanting to talk about how you can actually measure stress and what markers we can use to help make sure that we're getting back into balance. Because a lot of times we talk about being stressed, and sometimes it's hard to say, well, is that being seen by the body as stress, or how do you quantify something like that? And then we're also going to be sharing with you guys what we call these health hacks. So 7 health hacks that you can just walk away with today and kind of start to help really reducing and minimizing your stress. So I love this picture because this is such a perfect way for us to remember that perception is everything. And especially when we're talking about stress, we can see here, these people on this roller coaster, and this woman to our right is just having the time of her life, whereas the woman on our left is definitely not loving it. So we can be in these what's considered more stressful situations, and it really depends on how our body's perceiving those and how we are mentally perceiving those things as to what that translates for your health. So what is stress? It's really this reaction that our body has to any given change that's going to require adjustment. This can be a good stress or a bad stress, and we're going to talk about more about what that means for our bodies. But basically, it's this action-reaction mode that our body has. And we're always changing, right? We're dynamic beings. And so I love Dr. Sellier's work here. He has identified what's called eustress versus distress. And eustress is classified as a healthy stress. So just the process of living requires some amount of stress for our bodies to remain in a homeostatic balance. But distress is seen by the body as damaging or concerning. And so that's really what we're wanting to to mitigate. So this idea of homeostasis, we use that word a lot in naturopathic medicine, and at Prosper, we use it quite a bit. So that's really a way of saying balance. So we really want to remain in balance. And what happens is when our body is perceiving this distress, it goes into an alarm stage. And then if the stress is continuing, we progress into a resistance stage where our body is not responding as much to those hormones and those chemical markers that our brain and our adrenal glands are producing. And then eventually, if the stress continues, we get into the exhaustion stage. And of course, we know that as animals, we all require some amount of stress for survival. So this ability to get into the alarm stage and react appropriately, we're going to talk more about how that feels in your body, where that's really located as far as the nervous system push goes. But what becomes a problem, of course, is this resistant stress, the prolonged stress that we're really not designed to be under, the prolonged stress. And we have so much of that in today's world. So life in 2021 is full of stress for a lot of people. And when we say stress, of course, we're not just talking about, the mental and emotional component, although that's absolutely critical. But we like to break down stress into three distinct areas as physicians. So we're thinking about the physical being. So this can happen from traumas, maybe even traumas that happened many, many years ago for you when you were a kid even. And these things, these like slips and falls that can happen, play into how our body reacts on a day-to-day basis, even now. So unless you've, magically grown a new spine or lower back or something like that, if you've had a trauma, that does to some degree stay with you and inform your body's reaction. So we have these physical stressors, and that's always really important for us physicians to know and understand, because it gives us an idea about what we're kind of coming to the table with. We also have, the potential for a lack of exercise, and that's a big deal in today's society, especially, right now I've got you guys in front of these screens. So we're becoming more and more screen dependent, and oftentimes getting away from our ability to move and go through non-repetitive motion. Lack of sleep is going to end up being a big physical stressor for a lot of people. And we're going to, of course, dive into that, because without that piece managed, we're really up a creek. So, and then we also want to think about the food that's coming in to the body, because that could be perceived as a stressor as well. So we also have these environmental stressors. Of course, these are the things we think about them more like chemical stressors. That may be things that are on our food or in our general environment, whether it be in our home or our office space, and things like the pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, those kind of things. Also, the items that we put on ourselves for beauty care, those can often be filled with all kinds of chemicals that can be very damaging and be perceived by our bodies as stressors. And then there's some items that we can't necessarily see that are environmental, like the EMFs, those electromagnetic fields. And this is something that the generation prior to us did not have to experience. So it's kind of new, and research is really starting to come out. There's some actual interesting research from Harvard on this, on EMFs and how it affects our neurology. So there is, we all need our devices, but there is some importance to putting them down and turning them off and stepping away from them. And then artificial light also can be perceived as a stressor by the body, as well as, polluted air or water. So those things that are constantly coming in contact with our body can really be telling our chemical system how to respond in regards to, is this a stressful thing? Is this an inflammatory thing or not? And then there's the psychological stress. So that's everything from toxic relationship to financial struggles to living environment issues and work or family, or just generalized mindset. So how we perceive things. So once again, that perception really does play a role here. With with our stressors, we also like to break them into this understanding of long-term stress versus short-term stress. And that short-term stress is really, this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of the biophysiology, which we really love as naturopaths. Because if we can understand how this is affecting your body, we can help you on these different levels. So we've got these nerve impulses that come in that say, hey, I am stressed. And this is like the immediate reaction to some short-term stress. And this goes through the spinal cord and goes down and affects our adrenal medulla. And you guys are probably familiar when I say the adrenal glands. Remember, those are two small little glands that sit on top of our kidneys. And with the adrenals, we've got these different areas of the adrenal glands that produce different hormones, different chemicals. And we've got the adrenal medulla. And this is going to secrete these catecholamines, this epinephrine and norepinephrine, very exciting chemicals. And these help us increase our heart rate. They help us increase our blood pressure so that we can run away from that danger if we need to, versus the more prolonged stress. And this is the stressor that's coming in, going through that hypothalamic pathway and coming down and going to our adrenal gland as well, and affecting more that cortex of the adrenal gland. And that is really telling our body to release some chemicals, which you guys are probably familiar with. You've probably heard of cortisol, for example. So it releases those, which are glucocorticoids, meaning it affects our blood sugar, as well as mineralocorticoids, which are really affect our ability to regulate our electrolytes, like our sodium in our body. And that's a big deal, because we're going to talk about how that can affect our kidneys, how it can affect our blood pressure, and things like that. Also, our long-term expression of these glucocorticoids are known to not only dysregulate our blood glucose, which will eventually affect things like our weight management and our insulin resistance, but also it can affect our ability to have a balanced immune response. So what stress looks like in the body, and many of you may like raise your hands and say, hey, I've got some of those things going on from stress. Things like chronic fatigue and brain fog, maybe even irritability or moodiness, people who are having a hard time getting to sleep, initiating sleep, or staying asleep, and they're waking maybe with cycling thoughts. You may be experiencing things like having these intense sugar cravings or sweet carbohydrate cravings, especially midday when those adrenals have kind of pushed their packets of information to the body. Also things like inability to really concentrate well. We, of course, are going to be dealing with hormonal dysregulation as well here, not just because of what the adrenal gland's doing, but because of the interplay with our sex hormones. We can have that weakened immune response, that blood sugar instability, which can lead to lightheadedness, insulin resistance, weight gain, and lower mood like depression and even anxiety. We often will also talk to patients who are experiencing lower libido because of all of this as well. So the question really becomes, do you know how stress is affecting you? And most of us say, I'm stressed. I know I'm stressed. But take a moment to really think about what it's doing for you in your life right now. And the reason that this is important is it can give us the motivation to make the changes that we need when we can identify what areas are really being affected and what areas need to be supported. So if that's more in the glucose regulation and weight management area, there's that piece. If this is more in the mental concentration or mood and not feeling as irritable, there's that piece. There's so many different ways that stress can affect you. And I kind of feel like this lady with a whole bunch of Post-it notes on me. And now that Post-it notes are kind of like digital for me, it's even more intense. So, we get it. We get it as physicians here for you guys, as naturopaths. We really know that a lot of us are juggling a lot, and there's a lot on our plates and a lot to remember right now. But we need to think about this stress evaluation piece, because our body is sending us signals. So always primary that we look at those signals, we listen to our body, and we try to respond accordingly. So remember, number one, we've got these symptoms like the alarm bells going off. Your body is trying to reach out to you and say, hey, get a grip on this. I'm dealing with stress. This is how I'm manifesting it. So we want to address this as quickly as we can. Part two, for us as physicians, we often will want to think about cortisol testing for patients who are really struggling in this arena, or for people who we suspect might be having some resistance because of their long-term stressors. So let's talk about what that looks like. Many of you are familiar with these 4-point cortisol tests because we've done them together. But what you'll see is typically in the morning, our adrenal glands are supposed to make cortisol. It's supposed to help wake us up and say, hey, you're ready for the day, let's tackle this. So we've got our morning cortisol, which should be the highest of the day. And then as we go throughout the day, the cortisol level should start to come down. And we typically do this via saliva testing. And the reason that we do this is because we can get cortisol via blood work, but it would require a person to go in 4 times on the same day to the lab and get poked. And the big problem with that is a lot of times the labs close by 6 p.m. and we need an evening sample here too. So especially here in our rural community, this can be harder to get. So it's pretty awesome being able to have the salivary testing and knowing that that's a gold standard. It's just as accurate as our blood draw here. So really an awesome tool. So what we should see is this nice spike to wake us up. And if you guys remember from prior conversations that we've had on these doc talks, when we have our cortisol go up, our melatonin goes down. Remember, these are inverse. So our melatonin is our rest and sleep hormone. And we want that to be suppressed by our morning cortisol going up because it's time to get up and greet that day. So then throughout the day, our levels should start to come down and then just slowly kind of decrease into the evening. We don't want any major drop-offs. We don't want any major spikes back up, second winds, this kind of thing. So that's what ideally our cortisol is supposed to be looking like for our what we call diurnal regulation throughout the day. So remember what I had said about that immediate stress. So if that's happening, we're in stage 1. It's the alarm stage, okay? And what we see with that when we look at our testing is we see that cortisol spike up. So especially in the morning, we'll also see if we test some of your other hormones, we often see your DHEA-S show up as well. That's another adrenal hormone. And we'll see that level spike up inappropriately. So it's showing us we're dealing with an immediate response to stress. And remember, this is physiologic. The body is designed to say, I am in a stressful situation and I need to exit it. How do I exit it? Let's put all of our resources into shunting that blood flow so that we can survive through this experience. So that's what we're seeing here. And then when we look at the stress persisting, we start to step into our resistance area. And that is a two-phase process. So in early stage 2, we start to see some dysregulation where we still have a pretty early morning cortisol, but then we start to have like a little bump up midday before bedtime. So we don't want any of those bump ups that are going to give us those second winds in the middle of the day, because that can really dysregulate long term, like how rested we are and how well we're sleeping. And then also, of course, remember this excess cortisol that can start to show up can be really problematic for our blood glucose. So it can really start to affect our weight management. But then also if we're becoming, hangry, we call it, which is like when you're really hungry and getting hypoglycemic. So your blood sugar starts to get affected in this early resistance phase. Now we step into our late resistance phase, and at that point, what we start to see is we start to see a more blunted response. So we're not able to kick out that much cortisol, and we start to still see this little like evening kind of spike that happens, so people have a harder time getting to sleep on time, things like that. Stage 3 is what we call more of an extreme adrenal fatigue. Now, there's a lot of discussion in the functional medicine world and in the naturopathic medicine world about how to label these. But essentially, what we're looking at is at this point, the gas tank is empty. The adrenals are getting the signal from the brain to produce these hormones to respond to the stress, but there's nothing left. You just don't have any more reserves to give. So at that point, we start seeing this flatlining action, and that's really where we start to step into more chronic fatigue-like pictures for patients. And this is a big problem because not only does this manage how you're able to deal with other stressors that come in and have enough energy to wake you up throughout the day and keep you alert and thinking clearly, but also this is going to affect our ability to regulate our immune system and modulate our inflammation. So once again, we can do this in a few different ways. There's blood draws. We can do the salivary, and then there's even dried urine spot tests that we can do, and we do those sometimes with patients too. But typically, the salivary is the easiest and most effective as far as cost efficiency for our patients, and that's an at-home kit that we're typically giving if you're interested in that. The other piece is we're often thinking about other hormones and other organic acids, as well as neurotransmitter metabolites that can be secondary to the stress. And so oftentimes we're doing testing for that too, and that's either saliva or, once again, that dried urine spot that we're doing with that. And then with that, specifically the sex hormones are often implicated here because we have this effect on our brain from this chronic stress. So of course, if you're dealing with persisting stress, then your body is not going to want you to have a libido, be fertile, have to deal with that extra stress, for example, of offspring. So even if we're in the postmenopausal range, our sex hormones are affected by long-term stress. So evaluation component number 3 for us is really starting to monitor the nervous system function. And there are a few really cool tools that we do for this. One of the things that we do as part of our physical exam is we can be looking at how well your autonomic nervous system is responding to stressors. And we have a few different things that we can do with looking with lights in your eyes or moving a chair, taking your blood pressure, those kind of things to stimulate response and to see how well you're responding. So let's not get too wild about this, but I want to introduce you guys to the concept of this autonomic nervous system. Many of you are familiar with the terminology here of parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system. And we think of the parasympathetic as that rest and digest, and the sympathetic as that fight or flight. And the reason I want to point this out is because I want you guys to take a second and look at how the body maps these. It's actually really cool. So the sympathetic nervous system, which we think of as on overdrive whenever we're stressed out, and especially when we're stressed out long term, really is responsible for things like dealing with the pathway right along the spine, the thoracic spine. So this is so we can have those quick reflexes, get out of harm's way. We have our pupils dilate so we can see more around us and get away from that, that predator that might be after us. We get really dry mouth. A lot of times there's that inhibition of salivation, and that's because our digestion system is kind of shut down. And so it accelerates our heart rate, raises our blood pressure. So you can see that these are the vital organs that the nervous system is really putting its energy into when that sympathetic nervous system is activated. Now, I should say the sympathetic nervous system is always on, and that's really important because without it, we would have a big problem in regards to our heart and our lungs. So we need that on. what we call gating it is this parasympathetic nervous system. And that parasympathetic nervous system, if you look at how it's branching, you'll see it goes to these digesting organisms, these reproductive organisms. So it is going to help us with that saliva. It's going to help us with our digestion. So if you're somebody who's dealing with stress and you have digestive issues, we have to come back to this basic pathophysiology and say, is it as straightforward as the stress itself is affecting our guts? And we know there's this direct brain gut axis here with that parasympathetic nervous system. And we know as well that if the parasympathetic nervous system is not able to gate the always on sympathetic nervous system, we get into something called autonomic dysregulation, and that can be very dangerous for us. So we really want to have this balance. I like to think of it as the yin and the yang. These are our two systems in the body that need to work in combination, and they need to be balanced. So they help each other regulate. So once again, here we are as naturopaths saying, hey guys, we got to find balance here. So we don't want too much of that parasympathetic nervous system, but we don't want too much of the sympathetic as well. So we need to have this balance, and we need to be able to be reactive, dynamic. So when we say dynamic, we mean that we want you to be able to react appropriately to stress that comes in, and then be able to calm down. And if we're stuck in that state of being stressed and we either can't get out of it, or we come out of the stressful situation and yet the symptoms of the stress persist, then we have a problem with how these systems are being regulated. So this is another really cool tool that we can use. And you guys can even use this at home, and we'll talk about this in the tips part when we get into some of those hacks, is this heart rate variability. And what this is you guys are probably familiar with this picture here of the heart rate on an EKG. And what it's really measuring, so as doctors or as biologists, really, we label the different components of the heart wave, and we give them these letter names, right? So when we look at the R section, which is the very top part, when we look at the measurement between R to R, we can measure in milliseconds the variability. How different are the heartbeats themselves, if that makes sense. So what this tells us is pretty cool. So they've shown with studies that the more variability you have in your R to R interval, the better adapted you are to deal with stress and handle stress. And this is something that we can work on with our things like our Fitbits and our biofeedback trackers, our wellness trackers, some of those electronic trackers, to see what is your heart rate variability. Now, we definitely don't want somebody in arrhythmia, so don't get me wrong here, but that R to R interval should have slight variation here. Remember, we're talking milliseconds, but that will help us know that we are dynamic and we're adaptable still. It means that we're not in that more depressed state of our stress level, so of our adrenal management. This is a visual marker of this. Some of the apps will have something like this. It kind of gives you like, you want to be in this green zone for the variability. But many of you that have those apps, make sure that, like a Fitbit, it make sure that you're looking at that interval tracker. It's a pretty cool one that a lot of people miss. So let's get into some tangible things that you guys can walk away with today to really help you with tipping you back into that state of balance and away from that stress. So hack number one here is sleep. And this is really a huge deal. I cannot overemphasize how important our sleep is. We require typically 7 to 9 hours a night as adults, kids much more, but it's really important that if you are doing everything else in your power to manage your stress, but you don't have the sleep component nailed down, that is addressed. And so we are happy to help you with that here. That's something that we talk about with a lot of patients. You are not alone, and there are ways to improve your sleep. If you haven't found it yet, there are ways to help. It's one of my favorite things, helping people who've been dealing with insomnia for 20 plus years and finally getting them that quality rest because it's life changing. So we want to make sure, of course, that your room is comfortable. The place that you are sleeping doesn't have a lot of those EMFs. So we really don't want a TV in there even, let alone like your router or something like that. If you have a cell phone and you're sensitive to EMFs, making sure that that's turned off or turned on to a like a airplane mode, a flight mode, and placed away from you. We want to really keep a good routine. And of course, that comes down to that melatonin cortisol cycle, right? So keeping that routine is part of that. And then this is a piece that's always surprising to me. We invest so much in our cars, for example, like having a nice car, but a lot of times people won't invest in the place that they're spending over 8 hours a day in, which is our bed. So if you haven't treated yourself to a quality bed, really think about your mattress, really think about the quality of what it's being made with, and where you're sourcing it from and how it feels for you as far as firmness. And if it is something that is helping you reduce those night pains, or if you are dealing with pain that's keeping you up at night still. And then pillow as well. So we don't want anything that's going to be irritating your neck, anything that's going to be constricting your breathing as well. So as Americans, we think of the really fluffy pillow a lot of times, you know, especially if we're looking at media, they're fluffing up these big pillows, but we don't want anything that's going to cause that constriction there. So do think about that. And then, of course, you know, caffeine. So many of us are running on caffeine these days, and that is really going to get in the way. So a lot of you guys already know about the importance of sleep and have started to work on that. There is a really cool, you know, there are lots of cool biometric tools like the Fitbit I keep talking about, for example, and, you know, by no means do you need to get one of these, but this is just an example kind of what they can look like. So they can help us really understand how, you know, generally how we're getting to sleep, if we're getting to sleep on time, what our resting heart rate is, those kind of things, so we can keep ourselves, you know, more in that tighter window and support ourselves. And then also, we want movement. So that's our hack number 2. We've got to have movement. We're all required to move. So even if you are somebody who physically cannot move yourself, being taken through range of motion is absolutely necessary, and necessary for pain modulation, as well as our electrolytes and our blood flow throughout the body. But this is a big deal when our body is perceiving stress. So remember, too much exercise is seen as an overtraining component, and this is perceived by the body as a stressor. So we don't want to push it too much. It's one of the reasons why the HIIT training, that high intensity interval training, where you're doing a high interval and then calming down the system, is considered to be much better than just a high intensity for a long duration, because remember, that's communicating to your sympathetic nervous system as well that you are stressed. So we want to also get our walking in and our movement in through walking. I cannot emphasize how important the movement is through walking. We know that just walking outside and having the visual field pass us is critical for reducing things like dementia and stabilizing blood sugar, but that is speaking to our stress levels. If we can add that with getting outside, we'll talk about why that's so very important for us as well here in a minute. And then making sure that our fitness, when we're thinking about fitness, we're not just thinking about going to the gym and getting that aerobic activity in, but we're wanting to really think in a more holistic approach here about what's going on. Are we with our heart health? Are we doing something to engage our cardio? Are we doing something for our muscular and tendon strength in regards to resistance, whether that's with weights or with bands or with our body weight doing something like planks? We want to be thinking about flexibility. Remember, that's so important for shunting our lymphatic system as well. And then we want to be thinking about what's going on with our core. And one of the reasons why that's so important is because when we address our core, we help our spinal stability. And remember that sympathetic nervous system is flowing through the spine. So we want to keep our spine health as healthy and balanced as possible here for our stress. And then there's a lot of information coming out about these non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is activities. So these are things like ending your shower in a cool spray, jumping out here into the sound with a good wetsuit, those kind of things that are cooler activities. And that might seem a little extreme for some, but even just starting at the end of your showers with a cooler spray over your hands and feet as your extremities are a really good start for that. And that helps the microvasculature work out. Okay, so it's not just about these big blood vessels, it's about the small ones as well when we're talking about stress mitigation. So another really cool thing to remember, especially when we're in front of these kind of desks, computer stations, things like that, are adjustable desks that allow us to stand or sit and move. I often am sitting on a balance ball, and that helps me with my core throughout the day. Little things like that to keep me moving and not so repetitive, because it's that repetitive movement that can really be perceived as a stressor to the body. And then there's so many different health trackers. So many. So choose the one that works for you if you decide to go down that route. And a lot of people find that they just absolutely love the data. The data is just really helpful for them. So here we are on our next hack, and this is probably my favorite. It's breath regulation. And this is something that is free and available to you at most any time. And one of the big myths that we have is that we want to be taking a bigger breath because it'll help oxygenate us more, and that'll get more oxygen up to the brain. But actually, we find that we want what we call light, deep, and tempo breathing. And there's a book I'm going to recommend to you guys in just a minute here called The Oxygen Advantage book, and I'll give you the author's information. And it's just been a really awesome tool for me. And I'll tell you also, my husband and I like to free dive out here in the Puget Sound. And this is one of the keys, actually, this oxygen regulation that allows people who are athletes or divers to be able to dive under and have those longer breath holds. And it's a little bit different than what you might think, but it's really about balancing your CO2 with your oxygen levels. And so we know from the research that nose breathing is absolutely critical. When we think about breathing, we want to be primarily breathing through the nose because we know it helps increase nitric oxide. Now, some of my patients will be familiar with that term when they hear me talk about nitrous oxide. I don't know why it made that crazy red mark. I don't even know if I can change that. Sorry, guys. So that is definitely something that we want to be doing, breathing through the nose, because nitrous oxide affects our blood vessels and how they vasodilate. And we want that nitric oxide to help with the cleanup of oxidative stress as well. So there are two different types of nitrous oxide, and we don't have to really get into that, but it basically is very important that we do things like breathe through our nose, and we see this in yogic training, for example, and that can help with improve our blood vessels throughout our body and its oxygenation. So when we're talking about breathing. This idea of not just taking these big, deep breaths, because we can actually hypoventilate with that. We want to instead be taking these light, deep breaths, and there should be a tempo to it. They say about 6 breaths a minute. So nice and slow rhythm there. And then we also know from the research that we can alternate our breathing. So there's a really simple alternating breathing exercise, which you guys can all just take a second right now if you want and do it with me. But basically, you just plug lightly your right nostril, for example, and we're just going to breathe in. So we can hold here, or we can hold here, whatever's most comfortable for you. And then if you'd like to touch your third eye, you're welcome to as well. And you just breathe in through your left nostril. And then we're going to breathe out our right and switch our thumb to the other nostril. So we breathe out our right. And this time when we breathe in, we're going to breathe in through our right nostril. We're going to switch our thumb and breathe out through the left, keeping our mouth closed the whole time. So this is a very old style of breathing that was developed mainly by the yogis, is my understanding. And it can really help with our activation of the right and left brain. So when we're talking about brain connectivity and how well we're able to react to stress, we want both hemispheres of our brain to be working, not just the analytical side, but also the more creative side. So, gosh, I wish I could get this. I don't know if I could get that streak off. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I'm not going to mess with it for now. So as far as ways to, other ways to hack our nervous system. Oh, did I skip the book recommendation? So here's this book, if you guys want to write down the author's name. And it's just a great guide for you guys as far as ways to do breathing exercises that can help really modulate our breath control. There's another type of breathing technique I'll often recommend people look into, and it's called Buteyko breathing. And so that's another one if you guys are interested in that. So as far as hacking your nervous system, number 4 here, we really want to find time to have a mindfulness practice of some kind. So intentionally putting yourself on time out, or maybe it should be better called time in, so that you time in, but maybe in nature, so that you are able to really find that inner calm and do some of the self-work. And so this really can be a very critical part for people to actually schedule in, because otherwise it doesn't happen. We just get so busy. So if you can put it in your calendar and make it a self date, then it can actually happen. It can also be done in just really short little intervals throughout the day. Some of my patients will use little things like every time they come to a stoplight, they'll do a breathing exercise, or every time they are go and use the restroom, they take a moment to do some stretching or something like that, rather than staying in front of the screen the full time when they're working. So the importance of going into nature here cannot be underestimated as well. We know that we have, just a really important connection with nature, and getting that the fresh air as well as the sensory input of being in nature is absolutely important for our brain health as well. And then as far as balancing our nervous system, regular chiropractic care can be a really important piece there, or massage therapy as well. Remember, anything that's going to affect the nervous system, and I should also say acupuncture is a phenomenal option as well here, and Dr. Mary can talk about that more towards the end. And then we also want to make sure that we're activating our vagus nerve. So let's talk about the vagus nerve. Many of you guys have heard about this, but it is cranial nerve 10. It's an absolutely critical nerve to understand when we're talking about that parasympathetic, remember, rest and digest nervous system. It helps innervate our visceral, our organ system, especially when we think about it in that abdominal area. So it is going to be a very important one when we're thinking about how well are we digesting. So as far as really cool tricks and tips just to help you support that vagus nerve is, of course, we want to, try things like controlling our overall stress, and we want to focus on good foods and supporting our microbiome and our gut. Really important with those probiotics because we know how important they can be for our vagus nerve. But we also can do things like that cold exposure that I was talking about. So just a short exposure to cold stimulates temporarily that sympathetic nervous system, and then we get this rebound effect that kicks us back into that parasympathetic nervous system that helps stimulate that vagus nerve. So once again, ending those showers and that cool spray over your extremities, and then working your way into a longer exposure of cold over that thoracic area and your back would be really, a great option here. And then as far as little tricks you can do, we know that the gag reflex, which includes singing, humming, chanting. We say, oh, you're stressed, like sing to yourself in your car, sing a song you love, on the way to that stressful presentation or that stressful family gathering. It really does help stimulate that vagus nerve. So we can also do this by things like gargling. With the activating the gag reflex, often we can just use a toothbrush and kind of carefully, we don't want to actually vomit or gag ourselves too bad, but we just kind of push it back there against our posterior pillars lightly, and that can stimulate that gag reflex, and that reflexively tells that vagus nerve turn on and do your job. And then we also know that acupuncture, specifically, there's great research that shows that that's a really wonderful one for activation of our nervous system. And then as far as our breathing, we know that those belly breaths can be another big one for us for regulation. So our fifth hack here today is going to involve our food. So we wouldn't be good naturopathic physicians if we didn't mention diet at some point here. So we know that we need those B vitamins. That's very important for our adrenal glands to function. We also know that magnesium and calcium help, specifically that magnesium helps with regulation of our circulatory system and our muscle rebound as well, which, remember, all of those physiologic pieces can be perceived as stress by the body. And we know that magnesium can help with our sleep as well. Same with calcium. So also high protein foods, we know that those can be very helpful for reducing the perceived stress to the body, and then making sure that we're getting in our healthy fats. Remember, that really is brain food, but it's telling our body that we have that satiation and we have what we need. So as far as hack number 6 goes, there are certain supplements that can be really handy here. And especially if you know that you've been dealing with prolonged stress over a long period of time, we know that we start to deplete, of course, those vitamins that are fueling the adrenals in particular. So that's where things like our B complex, C, D, magnesium, and zinc can be really helpful. And then there are some of our favorite botanicals that are considered adaptogenic herbs as well, like rhodiola and schisandra and ashwagandha, and even turmeric, which we know that one specifically is more for inflammation, but that can also be really helpful for mitigating what your body is perceiving as stress. So one of the things that I like to do is make smoothies. It's just an easy way for me to get in several of these herbs and several of my supplements and make sure that I get my protein in, especially if I'm kind of in a rush in the morning. Also a great way to hide leafy greens from my kiddos. So I often will be putting in some kale or chard or some leafy green into that smoothie. And you can see here, we've got some ginger and turmeric going in, as well as those leafy greens, a little bit of liquid stevia to give it some sweet, some vitamin C, whey protein, but that can, of course, be switched out with hydrolyzed collagen, which is actually what I'm using more for myself, and then a blended greens as well. So simple way to kind of get a good amount of these nutrients in is a smoothie in the morning. So hack number 7 here has to do with perception. So hack your headspace. We want to make sure that you've taken time to kind of identify for you a clear and exciting purpose for your life. That's actually a huge deal. And a lot of us just get so involved in what's going on that we don't have time to really take a step back and look at the whole picture here, and kind of our driving forces. So really a great time to do that right here towards the beginning of the year. Say, okay, what are my personal goals for this year that may include family goals, business goals, and like inner spiritual goals as well. So take some time and make sure that you have identified that, and it would be a great thing to do while you're out on a nature walk. And then making sure, once again, that you're taking time to connect with nature and being social. And one of the hardest pieces with the pandemic going on, of course, is connecting in with those people that you love or your prior social networks. So a great easy tip is get a Bluetooth headset. And when you're on your walk in nature, especially around here, we have so many trails. When you're on your walk, connect in, call somebody, maybe an older relative that you know isn't getting enough contact. And it's a win-win for both of you to have a nice long conversation, not with your neck cramped, while you're on the phone, but instead just being able to go through your normal strides, hands-free, and even setting up a date with somebody where you say, hey, you live on the other side of the country, or maybe we're not in the same pod together and we don't feel comfortable, getting together right now, but I'll meet you at 1 o'clock and we'll go for a walk together and we'll meet over the phone and we'll keep each other accountable to make sure that we're actually doing it. And that can be really a great way. And I'll tell you, you can kind of solve the problems of the world sometimes with a good friend on one of these long walks through the woods. So, and then, making sure that we're remembering to have gratitude. So we know there's tons of research saying that the happiest people are people who are very grateful and often will practice gratefulness, journaling, or some kind of mental connection in with being thankful for things. So if that's not a practice that you've done, it's a really fun one to put a journal by your bed, and then in the morning just jot down 3 things that you're thankful for. And it's a great way to just kind of start the day and say, hey, this has been hard. I'm in the pandemic, but I'm not in the middle of, a horrible war or something like that. I'm whatever it is, it really gives perspective to be thankful for what we do have right now. And then there's EFT. For those of you who haven't heard of emotional freedom technique, it's a really neat tapping series of exercises, and there's lots of free videos on that online. Mercola has several really good ones, even if you want to go on Dr. Mercola's website and check those out. But that can be really helpful just to kind of release. And a lot of those, that EFT, I believe they're really looking at what we call either marma points, which would be like the Ayurvedic sort of component of these pressure points along the body, or more what we would think of like acupuncture points if we're thinking about the different medical models here. So one of my beautiful pieces over this last few months and year here has been working with Dr. Rosalie and Dr. Mary, because they provide these other perspectives from the naturopathic arena, and really expanding it out into the Chinese medicine and the Ayurvedic medical models. So we like to think about, when we're tapping these certain points that we know from ancient wisdom that they affect the nervous system and our response. So this could be a really helpful thing for releasing stressors and even past traumas, things like that. So then there's also this idea of what's our mindset? Are you somebody who has a fixed mindset, kind of frozen in time, or somebody who is dynamic and has that ability to grow and change and is interested and wants to be engaged in learning? And all of you showed up today, which is a great sign that you really want, that education piece and to grow. And then there's the meditation and prayer component, and that is just absolutely critical as well. This is a lovely little tip that all of us could probably use, which is occasionally, once a month, do a little reconciliation of your to-do list and see what's on there that needs to just be crossed off because it's too stressful and not worth, the stress, basically. So there are often things that creep into our activities that we just don't need to be doing. They don't actually serve us. So really, or maybe we can offload them to somebody else who would be better suited for it, that kind of thing. So make those lists and don't forget to get rid of the things that you don't need to be struggling with. And then, this is really exciting for us because one of the things that we're now offering our folks is to be able to go onto our website and sign up for these self-led programs. And so at any time during the year, you're welcome to go on and sign up for one of these programs. And this one for stress in particular is really awesome because you basically download this application to your phone or your tablet device called Well World, and we have personalized on there a food, supportive recipes and meals and shopping lists, as well as have an area there for you to track your goals, your progress metrics, like how well you're doing with that food intake, how well you're doing with hydration, how well you're doing with your movement and meditation. And then there's a bunch of videos that we give you on there as well for breathing techniques and meditation techniques, and it helps you track and stay on track during that 28 days. So the other piece there is this little mobile app can connect in with your Fitbit or some of the other Android trackers. So it's pretty cool to be able to integrate that data and have it all in one place. And then depending on if you want to do it completely self-guided, if you feel like I got this, then it's something that you can just get on and do whenever you're ready to do it. Otherwise, us physicians, the team here at Prosper, can help you. There's an expert guided option too, and that allows us to chat back and forth. So it helps us look at what you're doing and really encourage you, like, oh, okay, let's really focus on this area. It looks like you didn't get a chance to get your movement in today or something like that. And so we can really check in on what you're doing. So if you guys are interested in this, it's on our website, and here's the link here at the bottom. And I will have Dr. Mary or Dr. Rosalie send that out in the chat to you guys, so you can just click that as an easy link. It should take us right to the sign up page. And essentially what it will allow you to do is sign up, get the app, and then you can start into this diet. So let me tell you a little bit more just in general about kind of what it looks like, just for those of you who are interested. So basically you'll get this like startup page, and you can choose when your start date is, and then it'll allow you on there, you can see to chat back and forth with us if you sign up for that, and then also to keep track of those body metrics. So there's an area on there that'll help you know what to eat, what your daily guide is, recipes, and then if you decide to use some of the supplements, you can as well. So the food plan that comes with that program is really focused on a low processed food diet, so an anti-inflammatory diet. So we really like to focus in on things like bone broths and non-starchy veggies, are good gluten-free grains, and really low in dairy, and really low in our and our sugars, those kind of things, and some really good healthy oils. There are vegetarian options of this if you'd like, and if you do sign up, you can just ask us to go ahead and send you that option if that's something you want. So things that we ask people to exclude whenever they're dealing with stress, of course, are things like the alcohol, processed packaged foods. They're just not going to feed us. The candies and sweets, even though we have that reaction to want to go out and get those candies and sweets because of that cortisol, we want to really blunt that reaction and get our blood sugar back under control so we can affect that cortisol ultimately. And then of course we don't want any of our like the sweetened things like processed fruit juices, those kind of things. And then we ask people to eliminate gluten during that time too. So what this allows you to do is, you've got your program on here with your profile, and then there's support documents and videos and different goals. And then there's an area here for you to reach out for us for support too, if you decide to do that version of the program. There's tons of different documents as far as exercises and meditation components, all kinds of videos right here on the app for you guys to use. And then if you'd like, you can add some supplements to help support the program. They're not required, but there is a little area in the app. There's this little buy area that you can go to, and then the Designs for Health, who is partnered with us here, is an awesome physician grade company, and they will ship direct from their manufacturer facility to your house, which is really awesome. So we know that it's fresh and clean and coming right straight from them. So there were 5 different supplements which we chose for this specific program. The first one is an adrenal supportive called Catacolicom, and I'll talk about that in just a second. There's an omega, which is an omega-3, and it's a liquid, and then there is a probiotic, the ProBioMend 50, and then a B Supreme, which is a really awesome high potency B vitamin multi that you can take in the morning. And then there's magnesium glycinate, which is a really gentle form of magnesium, which is known to really help with stress, help with sleep, but not cause gut irritation. So one of the reasons we chose Catacolicom is this is a product that utilizes several amino acids in it to really help with the neurotransmitters and to help calm down that sympathetic nervous system. It also uses things like taurine and L-theanine, and then it also uses several of our favorite herbs, which we know from herbal medicine to be very helpful for calming the system. So things like passiflora, which is passion flower, small amount of valerian. It should not make you drowsy. And then some ashwagandha and melissa, which is lemon balm, one of my favorites. And then there's also phosphatidylserine, which we know to be an antioxidant for the brain that helps reduce cortisol production. So as far as our omega, the one we chose also has it has a high amount of DHA, which is nice. So that's, remember, brain food as an omega, but it also has our EPA, has a small amount of vitamin D in there as well. And then this is the probiotic components over on the left-hand side of the screen. So we've got a good blend of a wide spectrum probiotic that we know is so important for our gut regulation and gut health when we're talking about that vagus nerve. So just to give you guys an idea, because some people were having a hard time finding where to order supplements when they're on the program, you go through your plan and there's an area, that upper right-hand area for buying the supplements. So you can select supplements and then go from there. And then that'll take you to the third-party website, to the Designs for Health website. Once again, that's that physician-grade supplement company who offers those. So if you guys decide to do this, the way it works is you sign up for the program. You're going to be really excited, I know, to get started, but it's important that you download the information and make sure, if you're going to get the supplements, to get those ordered so that they can come, and then select a start date for after the supplements are going to arrive. So make sure to give yourself a buffer. Right now with the pandemic, I would say at least 1 to 2 weeks, just to make sure that you have everything ready to go before you start. And then make sure you also, if you decide not to do the supplements, even make sure you give yourself the time to really clean out your fridge and get ready for a little bit of a dietary shift and be able to study that diet a little bit. So even though it has the very helpful shopping list and things like that, it's really nice to just prep. So as far as this goes, once again, it is, we also give a little, an ebook that's really helpful just for managing adrenals as well. So it's just a little bonus that we like to do. So there are 2 tiers for this. It's $37 for the base kind of DIY version, where it's you know, you're just ready to go and you get all the information you need and you can jump right in. And then if you want to work more closely with our physicians throughout this, it's the $87. And then that will allow you to be texting through this HIPAA compliant app back and forth and asking us questions about what's going on for you. So remember, you guys, with stress, one of the most important things is to be proactive and not just reactive. So we all have stressors. If we can mitigate the stressors that are coming at us and get into the area that we're really helping to support ourselves so that we can deal with stressful situations as they come up, that really is the name of the game. So we want to just also invite you guys as our educational outreach here to our next Doc Talk, which is going to be the 2nd Tuesday of next month, right at noon. And remember, you guys can sign up, even if you can't make it at the time. We'll record it and send it to you. So just make sure you're signed up so you get the recording if that's the case. And it's going to be there on March 9th, and it'll be on the immune system. So very timely with the pandemic for everybody to be thinking about that, especially with the vaccine rollout and everything like that. So we're really looking forward to that, because managing that component of our stress with the pandemic is also very critical. So I'll kind of leave you guys with this quote here. Take good care of your body because it's the only place you have to live. And I just think that that's just so apt. So remember to put yourself forward here in regards to needs and really take care of yourself. So if anyone needs, there's that link there to the program if you guys decide to do that. Let's go ahead and Dr. Rosalie and Dr. Mary, let's go ahead and go through any questions that might have come up.
So if you've got any questions, feel free to type them into the chat and we'll sort of go through them one by one. In the meantime, while you think about your questions, we can go over the poll results. Remember in the beginning, we asked what stress management tool has been most helpful or useful to you. And it seems like number 1 is exercise movement, which includes yoga and outdoor nature time for people. Number 2 is sleep, which some people have a hard time with, but when they sleep, it is very stress reducing. And the 3rd one was meditation mindfulness, which also included prayer time.
Thank you guys all for joining. Does anybody have, oh, here we do have a question, and it looks like it's from Jane. Hi, Jane. Good to see you on here today. I surely miss you. So she's saying that she's got a lingering pain from an old ankle fracture, and is it possibly a symptom of stress? There's no explanation, no medical explanation as to why that pain would still be lingering. I am excited to give my 2 cents on this, and then I want to see what Dr. Mary and Dr. Rosalie have to say too, because they've got such awesome perspective on especially pain management. So to me, when the body has an injury, it does have memory of this. So you had a fracture, and so that means that there was inflammation at that site, and there is, cellular damage as well as more of a macro damage to the bone that happened there. And we know that there's a very important nervous system component around that sheath of the bone, and so we could have, some irritation still going on there from that. So my thought is, yes, the body still can remember the injury, and pain can be produced, and especially if you're more tired or your parasympathetic system is not gating as well, your sympathetic system, all pain gets worsened, okay, with the stress. So Dr. Mary, Dr. Rosalie, you want to give your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, so thank you for that perspective. From a Chinese medicine perspective, the pain is often a sign of qi stagnation. So qi is kind of this animating force that propels us in the world, and it flows throughout our body. And when we have long-term stressors, it can impact in what we call in Chinese medicine is the liver organ. And that is responsible for maintaining that free flow of blood and qi. So in Chinese medicine, the lingering pain is definitely associated with long-term stress and impact on that liver organ. So we use acupuncture and herbs to help support the liver organ and also move qi throughout the body. And and I agree, from a Western medicine perspective, you can also just have increased neural sensitivity with that long-term high cortisol, that the pain sensation stays higher or is more pronounced for a longer period of time.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, something very similar from an Ayurvedic perspective, which is your traditional Indian medicine, is that pain is, a stagnation of your prana energy, which is the same idea as qi. It's just got a different name in Sanskrit. And that the importance has to do with moving it throughout the body. So finding ways to release that stagnation, either through marma point therapy, which is basically acupressure, or allowing the bowel movements to be even, or doing breath work, movement therapy, yoga, all of these things to sort of move the body and move the stagnation out of that specific place.
So really, really important to think about moving that stagnation and addressing that old injury, if at all possible. So the next question we have is a really great one from Jennifer, and she's asking, how would you say stress can affect the health and the function of the immune system? For example, could higher stress levels lead to increased susceptibility to colds, flus, etc.? So Jennifer, you're going to definitely want to join us next month, or at least make sure that you click on the registration link so that you can get the video, because we're going to go into that in much more detail, because it's going to be all about immune system. But we see very clearly from the literature that high stress and high amounts of prolonged stress tank the immune system. Specifically, there were simple studies done with students and looking at their white blood cell count. And these were medical students, actually. And I remember one of these studies came out while I was in med school. And what they did to these poor students is they said, you've got this exam and you don't have any time really to study for it. You're going to have to cram. And so they would really stress out these students, and then they would look at their white blood cell count and they would watch it tank as the exam became closer and closer. And then the wild secondary study that was done right about that same time was, then they checked the levels for these students after they went on winter break. So then these students got done with their major stressor, And sure enough, they looked at how many of these students got sick right after coming off of their midterms and going to winter break. And it was staggering, the number of students that got sick because they had suppressed immune systems going into this travel season or this time where they're off. So maybe their stressor is decreased, but that interpretation of the stress for the body and that decrease of their immune response remained with them and made them sick. So, and we also see this with foods. So we've got great studies that show, for example, even things like sugar in orange juice. You know, we think, oh, drink orange juice, it's great, it's vitamin C, it's good for our immune system. Well, there's studies that show just the 30 to 50 grams, which is a hefty amount of sugar that comes in that glass of orange juice, blunts your white blood cells' ability to do its job. So we know sugar equals a stressor to the body, and that blunts our immune system too. So add on more. Other doctors, Dr. Rosalie and Dr. Mary, what do you guys think?
I think that explanation of how stress affects the immune system is excellent. We see that with autoimmune conditions too. After long-term elevated cortisol and stress, sometimes the body can't keep up. So then the cortisol goes down and suddenly the immune system comes on board. So suddenly you have this overactive immune system because it was dysregulated from that long-term stress. And from a Chinese medicine perspective, long-term stress basically decreases our internal reserves, and our immune system is called the Wei Qi in Chinese medicine, and it kind of is our external barrier to the world that prevents external factors from causing disease. So in Chinese medicine, managing stress is part of supporting that Wei Qi and preventing disease.
Yeah, indeed. I'm just going to add on. It's all about cortisol. So cortisol is our stress hormone, and we know that we can decrease inflammation in the body through having a prescription of a cortisone, a sort of similar molecule, just made chemically. And so when we have a hydrocortisone, we're decreasing the immune system, decreasing the inflammation. If that comes endogenously from you, stressed, increased cortisol, same thing is happening. We're decreasing our immune system and making ourselves more susceptible to disease. We also know that if there's chronic inflammation in the gut, that is also very stressful from the physical perspective, and that making sure the gut is in balance is going to help our parasympathetic system. And there's studies about how probiotics affect the vagus nerve and how all that comes together to decrease stress.
Well, thank you guys. We had a great time today, and we just want to say we're looking forward to seeing you guys, either to help you guys out with stress management through the cool stress release program that we have, or also we're just looking forward to seeing you guys next month when we talk more about the immune system. We're going to really dive into it. It's going to be a good one. There'll be lots of good takeaways for you guys. So thanks again for joining today, and have a good one.